Alrighty. So I wanted to make a video to answer the question, what is conversational transformation? And as I'm sure you can see, where I am right now is a little bit dark. So you'll have to bear with me in that regard. But I wanted to answer the question, what is conversational transformation? And give you a bit of a high level view in terms of what the approach is all about. So to begin, the first thing I'd say about conversational transformation is a principle based approach to change work that focuses on facilitating meaningful psychological and emotional shifts through a free flowing dialogue. What I mean by that is the approach is conversational in nature. It's in some sense no different than having an ordinary conversation with someone. There is more going on than that, but the nature of the approach feels natural because we have conversations all the time. So, as a practitioner, you're drawing from something process that is innate, that's inherent to being a human being. And that's one of the nice things about this process when you're working with a client is it's really about being able to let go and allow a session to flow. So that's what I mean by free flowing dialogue. And instead of relying on tools or techniques or scripts with conversational transformation, we're focusing on what a client's unconscious mind is already presenting to us moment by moment throughout a session. And what I mean by what their unconscious mind is presenting is there are certain things that you learn how to pick up on, how to perceive. So this is a lot of what we learn with CT is how to expand, or a lot of what you would learn is how to expand your perception, how to pick up on things that are happening already in a session that will help you to know what direction to go with a client. Because usually what we do, many traditional approaches, is we show up with what the process, the tool, the technique, the script, whatever it is that we're going to get a client to follow. The difference, one of the main major differences here is that we're starting with where the client is at. We're responding to what the client is presenting to us, more specifically, what their unconscious mind is presenting to us. And that's how we know where to go next, or the different ways we can go. Because there's not just one way we can go, there's many different ways we can go. So rather than trying to make something happen for a client, we're recognizing and working with what is already emerging from this space within them. And the space I'm talking about is this, what I refer to as unconscious territory, because we're focusing on unconscious change work here, unconscious transformation, hence the name of the approach, conversational transformation. And what happens as we pay attention to the client, we focus on this space, this unconscious space, versus more of what's the client will also present to you, which is what's coming from what they know, or we could say conscious territory. We're helping a client to basically uncover the deeper layers of their problem in such a way that the problem naturally begins to resolve itself. We're helping the client to start to explore things, aspects of the problem, to uncover layers of the problem that were previously hidden from view. And as these layers start to become visible to the client, these layers that were previously hidden, the underlying pattern or patterns that are leading to the problem that the client is experiencing start to reorganize on their own. And this has a lot to do with the connections that the client makes throughout the process, throughout a session, as things start to become more and more clear to them in their own way. So we can think of CT as helping a client to experience a series of shifts throughout a session until eventually the overall problem they started with shifts as well. And as these shifts occur throughout a session, client will begin to see aspects of the problem they didn't recognize before. And it's through this recognition that they start to make they start to come to new realizations, they start to make new connections, they start to access things that they weren't aware of before. And this is where that reorganization I mentioned starts to take place. This is where things really begin to shift for them. So what makes this possible if this is just a conversation? Well, there is another important ingredient to this approach, and that is conversational transformation. More specifically, the trance I'm referring to here is naturally occurring trances. Naturally occurring trances being the trance that your client goes in and out of all of the time. So it's not something we're creating for the client, or to use a traditional hypnosis term, we're not inducing a trance. We're not taking a client into trance. We're catching when they go into that space, which they will, because a client, especially when they're talking about a problem, will go into the space on their own naturally. So naturally occurring trances. And these are the moments where a client's focus, where their attention shifts from outside, out here, more to more inside, which is exactly where we want a client's attention to be if we're working with their unconscious mind, if we want to use that idea, that metaphor, working with their unconscious mind, working with more unconscious material is probably how I would put it. So it's in these moments that trance becomes like a doorway that allows a client to uncover patterns, these patterns that would otherwise remain hidden from view. And this is one of the major differences between CT and many other approaches. We're never telling a client what to do or what to think or where to go. Instead, we're listening and responding to what comes out of this space. To use the metaphor again, what their unconscious mind is communicating beyond the story that their conscious mind is telling. So we're more interested in what's behind the story, pattern behind the story. So what does this look like in practice? Well, conversational transformation, it's a standalone approach, something you can use in its entirety as a standalone approach. However, at a deeper level with CT is really about understanding what makes change work. That's what I mean by a principle-based approach, because these are the principles that are behind the tools and techniques that work when they work. It's not the tool or the technique that's creating the change. It's the principles that are behind the tool or the technique that make it possible for the change to take place. So that's more what I'm interested in. What happens when you take away this? What happens when you take away, when we strip things down to their most basic form? So regardless of how you choose to work with your clients, CT is meant to inform however it is you choose to work with clients, because you're going to be picking up on things. You're going to be expanding your perception in such a way that the aim is for you to have more flexibility, for you to be able to adapt to situations as they arise. One student who took a foundations training recently mentioned that with CT really helped them to bring everything they knew together, to weave it together. Whereas before it was like, how do I know what to use when? It's something that will inform, will amplify, will make it easier to use what you already know. But ultimately, also, CT is about being able to help your clients by also placing that aside and showing you that there's very little that's required in order for a client to get where it is that they need to go. And that's a great segue when it comes to what is it that makes CT different. So I'm going to give you a couple of ways of thinking about what's different in terms of using this approach, using CT when it comes to working with your clients. So the first thing I'd say is you don't have to fully understand what's happening in a client's mind. When we're using CT, it's more about the connections, the realizations, the aha moments, the realizations that your clients make. As long as things are making sense to them, that's all that really matters. You, as a practitioner, only ever have to know enough to ask the next question to help the client get to that next layer, to discover something that a moment ago wasn't as clear to them. So it doesn't have to be clear to us. This is not about us getting more clarity. It's about the client getting more clarity. So you can be, let's say, completely lost, but somewhat lost in terms of what it is a client is speaking about, and the client still gets the change. It's not about us getting clarity. It's about helping a client to get clarity, especially when they go more into unconscious territory, when we're really engaging their unconscious mind. That's where you can start to get a client speaking in ways that are vague and abstract and maybe don't make much sense. But for them, it makes complete sense. They're telling you, oh my God, this is amazing. I've never thought about this before. And that's what we're after. So it's more important that they understand what they mean than we understand what they mean. And this is where less truly is more, because although this approach is conversational, most of the shifts take place in silence. Most of the shifts take place in silence. Most of the shifts take place when we're not saying anything. when we're allowing the client to be in this space, that space within themselves, where things become more and more clear. So in many ways, usually, or at least at some point in a session, various points in a session, there are typically fewer words. There's more space. There's less you need to do as a practitioner. It's about getting out of client's way, getting out of our own way, and allowing the change, the shifts, the transformation to unfold on their own. This is where one of the results, probably not the word I'm looking for, one of the experiences, say, that many practitioners have as they use CT more and more is they naturally find themselves becoming a lot more present with themselves, a lot more present with their clients in a session where you're no longer rushing to get a result. You're no longer worrying prior to a session about what it is that you need to do. You're no longer thinking after a session, did I go in the right direction? You're being present with the client because you have to be present with the client to respond to what's happening moment by moment. And this is where the way you're being, the way you're showing up as a practitioner can really start to shift, and your clients will feel that too. And that's where I like to say this is a human-centric approach. It's about being yourself and inviting your clients to be themselves as well. As I mentioned, we also learn how to pick up on these naturally occurring trances. There's many different ways that trance manifests in a session, even day to day, with people you know all around you. When you learn to recognize how trance manifests, it's no longer something that you have to create or somewhere you have to take your client. It's something that, as I mentioned previously, you can catch. And when you're able to catch that, when a client goes into that space, there's so many opportunities right in front of you, so many directions you can go with a client where it's no longer, all right, I'm on step 3 of this process. Now I have to go to step 4, but your client's not responding to step 4 in the way that you were taught they're supposed to respond. So now what do you do? Whereas with CT, you're perceiving that, hey, your client's unconscious mind is presenting this, but it's also presenting this and this too. I could go here, I could go there, I could go there as well. And this gives you options, gives you many different ways that you can go with a client in a session. So there's more choice for you. There's more flexibility. You can find yourself going down one road or going down another and seeing where it takes you. And this is where with CT, we're not ever directing a client what to do. We're following their unconscious mind's lead, and we're exploring where it's already going. And this, in many ways, removes the pressure to make something happen. There's nothing we need to make happen here. Because when you notice something that's already happening or something that's about to happen, you can follow that path. This is something I refer to as the hidden thread. So we're adapting, responding to what is happening, what's about to happen, what could happen when we follow that path. And this is where you can relax and you can explore and you can follow your curiosity. And there's a lot of room to play. So a big part of what you'd be learning with this process is what to pay attention to. Because when you know what to pay attention to, it's easier to know what question to ask next. It's easier to know what strand to follow. Power is less in the questions themselves and more in knowing what to ask about. Or sometimes a question might not even be necessary. Maybe it's something you reflect back. Maybe it's not saying anything at all. But knowing where, when not saying anything at all is going to has the potential to make the biggest difference. As I mentioned, there's no scripts, no recordings, no tools required, no homework. Another interesting thing about this approach is that a lot can continue to shift for a client following a session where you do the work with a client in the session. They feel a shift, they feel different, and then changes continue to unfold in the days, the weeks that follow, where your client is finding themselves in those situations where in the past the problem would have come up for them, and now they're realizing that they feel different, and this has the potential to create a ripple effect, often into other areas of their life too, where you're working on the problem that they come in for, and it turns out they get changes in other areas of their life too that they weren't even expecting. And this is because we're helping the client to make changes to that deeper pattern or those deeper patterns that are behind the story, and quite often are behind more than one story, not just the story that they're showing up with, but other stories in their life are connected to other problems too. So sessions don't need to be long. They don't need to be complicated. They don't have to make sense to you. But because we're working through these layers that are behind a client's story, and because these layers can be connected to more than just the problem that they're working on or that they've come to you to work on, this is where a client can get shifts that are not just meaningful, but can impact many different areas of their life. So going for simplicity here, of course, every session is always different, but as I mentioned before, less is more here in terms of the way that you work as a practitioner and the changes that can spring from that place for your client. And I think that brings me to my last point, which is that with CT, the focus is on the person in front of you, whether it's on Zoom or online or in person. Focus is on your client. It's no longer on yourself. Because it's the client that makes the connections. It's the client that gets the resolution. And since they're the ones that ultimately discover the solution to their own problem, there's no pressure for you to fix them. Hopefully you can get a sense of the freedom in that, to relieve yourself of that pressure, where you can explore, you can play. There's the opportunity to have fun, to be laughing with your client, to use humor and levity where appropriate, and for your client to still get to that place where something shifts, something changes, and maybe they don't even realize how. And yet, they feel better. So that's some insight into, hopefully some insight into the quality, the feel, maybe even the look of the process, the approach. So the last thing I'll talk about is how conversational transformation is taught. There are two primary levels to conversational transformation. The first is foundations. So conversational transformation foundations. Foundations basically shows you the entire approach from, not just shows you, but teaches you the entire approach from start to finish. So everything you need to know to use conversational transformation with your clients right away. And when I say right away, the way this approach is taught is so that you can take what you learn from every session and implement it right away. Start to put it into practice right away with your clients. Of course, you want to go through the entire training in order to understand how to use the entire approach with your clients. But everything you learn is stuff that you can start to use in your sessions in the way that you're already working with your clients, because these are principles. So foundations teaches you entire approach, how to use it start to finish, all of the phases of a session, and how to end a session, how to do additional sessions, things like that. Once you've done the foundations, you have everything you need to use conversational transformation with your clients. If you want a deeper dive, there are advanced trainings. So once you have the foundations, you can do any of the advanced trainings. And the advanced trainings are really about, one, going even deeper into some of the principles that are taught on the foundations training, or at the foundations level. But we also explore additional advanced principles that can be woven into your sessions. And each of these advanced trainings teach you principles that can be used on their own, so they can be used independently, but they also overlap and build upon each other, meaning you can use the principles in isolation, but they can also be used in combination too. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the topics we talk about on the advanced training and give you a very, very short synopsis or idea of what are some of the ideas, themes, things that we touch upon in the advanced training. So the first one is working with emotions, working with polarities, working with metaphors. These are things that are taught in the foundations training. We do a deeper dive on each of these topics. With working with emotions, talk about how emotions change, how they show up spontaneously in a session, how easy, how little effort is required in order for emotions to not only come up, but also to release for a client. So working with emotions is the first thing. Working with metaphors is something we also talk about. When we're working with metaphors, we're not bringing our own metaphors into a session. This is not some sort of isomorphic metaphor or something Ericksonian. We're not coming into a session with pre-prepared. Sorry, I'll turn up my alarm here. We're not coming into a session with pre-prepared metaphors. We're only ever using the metaphors, metaphorical language, the metaphors that a client presents to us, which they're presenting to us all of the time. So I show you how to not only use your client's metaphors, but also how to use them in such a way that it's often will take them into unconscious territory, take them into that trancey space. The third thing we talk about is working with polarities. This is something that's also taught on the Foundations training. Polarities you can think of as it's like the dichotomies, the opposites that show up in a session. This is where clients will have inner conflicts or contradictions that they experience that come up. How do we work with polarities? This is a big one, a big thing that will show up in pretty much every session if you pay attention. And this goes beyond things like part work, where a client can integrate two sides of internal conflict, again, like working with emotions, with very little effort required when you know what to do. Formulating questions is something we also talk about. How can you formulate questions based on what your clients are giving you? There's no book of questions here. There's no pre-formulated or questions that you have to memorize. This is not what that's not what this is about. Questions are always in relationship to what your client is presenting to you moment by moment. And that's the difference here. There's nothing special about the questions that are being asked, but it's important to understand the word I'm going to use here is more the quality of questions that you want to ask a client. So formulating questions. Next thing I talk about, or one of the other advanced things I talk about, is something I call the universal pattern. This is the pattern that is underneath, is behind any tool, technique, or approach that works. So when you understand the universal pattern, you can understand the backbone, the framework behind successful tools, techniques, what it is that happens, whether or not you know it, when you're using a tool, a technique, approach that helps a client get a result. So once you understand the universal pattern, this is something you can use as a framework, even outside of conversational transformation, to know how to navigate any session and how to know where and when a client is getting change, they are, or if they aren't, and what to do, where to go next, basically. Hypnotic weaving is a way of showing you how to weave conversational transformation with other ways of working. Let's say you do coaching, or let's say you do whatever else it is that you like to do when you work with your clients. How is it that you can take the principles of conversational transformation and weave that into your work with clients to amplify the results you get, to help your clients get where you want to help them to get, where they want to go in a much shorter period of time, so that there's less work required for you? Where I'll give you an example where instead of having to use a tool or a technique 4 or 5 times, you could use it once or twice, because you're starting at a much different place. You're knowing what to target, which not only saves you time, but saves the client time in terms of helping them to get where they're looking to go. And when I'm using the word hypnotic here, I'm not using the word hypnosis in a traditional sense. Hypnotic, the word I'm using here, is really a short form for working with the unconscious mind. Something else we talk about is what I refer to as emotional logic. And emotional logic is the logic that your client uses emotionally to talk about their problem. When you understand emotional logic and you are able to pick up on when your client is using emotional logic, this is where you can help them to start to explore the emotional logic of the problem in such a way that the problem starts to fall apart. There's more to that one, but I'll leave it at that. Something else we cover is motivation, desires, and outcomes. This is the other side. Usually we're focusing on helping a client with a problem, but there's also going to be what a client wants. And this is something that you can explore with a client too, where we're not just focusing on what they want to move away from, but helping them also to focus on what it is that they want. And in doing so, the interesting thing is we also find out more about what it is that they don't want, or vice versa. Which brings me to working with resources. Working with resources, resources being anything positive that naturally emerges in a session. What do you do when a client starts to feel better, when they start to talk in more positive, resourceful ways? There are ways to take the resources that your client presents to you and reflect them back so that they grow, they expand, they increase, and they get better and better. Confusion as a catalyst for change. Confusion, this is where we start to move into, I mentioned how less is more with foundations. This is where we start to move into more is more. And what I mean by that is, yes, there is very little you need to do in order for a client to go into that transient territory where we work with clients using conversational transformation to help them get changes. But there are also more deliberate ways we can work with a client to help them to go into that space without having to wait for them to go into that space. And one of the ways that we can do that is using confusion, which is what we learn on the Confusion as a Catalyst for Change training. Humor, paradox, and levity. This is also something that is very important when it comes to CT, because clients are taking their problems too seriously. And I say that with all due respect. Weaving humor, weaving levity, weaving something I call paradox into sessions is something that we can take not only to make sessions more playful and fun for both us and the client, but also as a tool to help a client step outside their stuck thinking and step into more creative ways of thinking, which can ultimately lead to more resourceful ways of thinking. And finally, the last two is reason. Reason is it's a way of helping to bring a client's conscious mind into the process, or acknowledge their conscious mind, acknowledge the thinking, reasoning, logical side of their mind in such a way that it brings a client into that unconscious space. Probably doesn't sound like it makes sense, but I'm going to leave that one at that one. And the last thing I'll say is hypnotic themes. Again, hypnotic, I mean unconscious or not conscious, not dead, but like non-conscious, let's say. Hypnotic themes, these are the underlying themes that run through change work. And when you understand these themes and you can use them in a session, they are a great way to indirectly suggest and acknowledge that change is, can, will, does happen. And Yeah, I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I'm going to leave that on at that. So, hopefully this has been informative or has given you more of a sense of what conversational transformation is about. I know this is still a bit of a higher level, but I did want to create a video to help explain, give some sense of what this is. I'll probably make another video of this or another video about this in the future that perhaps might be a bit clearer. Feel free to make some comments below if you have any further questions. But basically, the last thing I'll leave you with is that with CT, in terms of the look and feel of the approach, the process as a practitioner, yes, you're holding space. Yes, you're working with a client's attention and the deeper patterns behind their issue as these patterns reveal themselves throughout a session. But really the result, I would say, and this is coming not just from me, but more so from students and what they've had to share, is sessions become simpler, they become clearer, they become more natural. Clients reach their own aha moments. They come to their own resolution. You, as a practitioner, start to become more present, more relaxed, more confident as a result. And the transformation springs from something that is innate, inherent, that we're all capable of doing, which is having a conversation, connecting with another person, another human being, rather than taking them through technique or tool or an artificial process. So you can think of conversational transformation as a principle-based approach that's grounded in how unconscious change takes place. But ultimately, it's really about bringing more of you into your approach to working with other clients, and also allowing a client to bring more of them into their session or your session with them together as they're working with you. I'll leave it at that. Hopefully this was informative. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions in the comments below or by reaching out to me directly, and be well.